Okay, so this webinar is geared towards institutions that are already ORCID members or may soon be joining, as we cover the basics of how to get started and get the most value from your ORCID membership. We're going to start today with an intro to the ORCID US community and a brief review of how ORCID works. Then we'll cover an overview of getting started at your institution with stakeholder support, technical integration, and outreach and education, with a few examples from across the community. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat, and we will address questions toward the end of the hour. And we also have Eric Olson with us today from the ORCID organization, and so he's a special guest that will be helping us answer questions later on during this session. So let's begin with a big picture look at ORCID, which is a global initiative. There are over 5 million individuals all over the world that have ORCID IDs, and over 900 institutions are ORCID members, and there are over 550 system integrations with ORCID across the globe. There are currently 18 national ORCID consortia, indicated by the countries in green, which includes the ORCID US community. In the Americas region, the US, Canada, and Brazil have national ORCID consortia. In addition to the ORCID US community, which is primarily for research institutions, we also have the Health Research Alliance Consortium in the US, which is a group of funding institutions participating in ORCID. There are other institutions in the US and the Americas who are ORCID members, but not through the consortial approach. The pie chart at the bottom left corner here shows that research institutions are leading the ORCID initiative in the Americas, followed by publishers, associations, repository or profile organizations, government agencies, and funders. This map shows our ORCID US community. We now have 103 members officially, and we're expecting a few more that are scheduled to join us this month. Currently, about 1/3 of our members have active ORCID integrations, with 2/3 either in planning stages or in development. As you can see, there's a higher concentration of institutions on the East Coast, with a lot of room for growth out west. We're expecting to see our community expand in the next several years. And to learn more about who our members are, visit orcid-us.org. So the ORCID US community was formed in January of 2018 when Neural, Gwilla, the Big Ten, and Lyrasis came together to form a national ORCID membership group led by Lyrasis. The benefits of being an ORCID US community member include a discounted membership fee, dedicated technical and community support, 5 premium member ORCID API credentials for 5 system integration points, a monthly newsletter and statistics report, and access to ORCID US member resources, such as our members-only discussion forum. One of the goals of the ORCID US community is to build an actual community of practice around ORCID at research institutions in the US. As I mentioned, our ORCID US website is now live at orcid-us.org, where you can find information about the community, membership, technical support, community resources, ways to get involved, and an FAQ. On the membership page, you'll find benefits of ORCID membership, and if you scroll down, you can find the new members guide, which outlines the ways that new institutional members can get plugged into the community. And since our group just formed this year, existing members may also want to take a look at the new members guide just to get familiar with the community and communication channels. For example, we have a members-only discussion forum where representatives from US member institutions can communicate with each other and share their experiences and advice. As you get started with ORCID, make sure to remember that you can use these resources and the collective wisdom of the community to your advantage. The members-only discussion forum is a great place for sharing, asking questions, and finding out who else might share your same opportunities or challenges. Please feel free to start a new topic in the forum and communicate with others there. If you're not yet plugged into the forum, please send an email to orcidus@lyrasis.org to get an invite. And also, if you need assistance or advice at any point, please don't hesitate to contact me and set up a consultation. I also want to point out that on the Community Resources page of the ORCID US site, you will find the ORCID US Planning Guide, which outlines recommendations and considerations for getting started with ORCID adoption at your institution. To get the most value from your ORCID membership, two equally important activities need to take place at your institution. That is technical integration and outreach and education. The ORCID US Planning Guide outlines considerations for getting started with each of these aspects. So we are going to follow the outline of the planning guide today in this webinar. Before we dive in, let's do a quick review of ORCID basics, starting with the ORCID vision, which is a world where all who participate in research, scholarship, and innovation are uniquely identified and connected to their contributions and affiliations across time, discipline, and borders. ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier and was primarily created to help with name ambiguity in the realm of research and scholarly communication. ORCID provides a unique 16-digit number assigned to an individual researcher to distinguish them from other individuals and link them to their affiliations and contributions. The ID can be formatted as a dereferenceable URI that links to an individual's ORCID ID record, and anyone can get an ORCID ID for free at orcid.org/register. ORCID ID records include name and ORCID ID number, with options for including alternate names, country, email addresses, keywords, other IDs like a Scopus ID, and websites, as well as education, employment, funding, and works, such as publications, presentations, performances, etc. This is a screenshot of my ORCID record when I'm logged in. As you can see, the privacy settings are controlled by the individual, so I can control the overall privacy of my record. The privacy or visibility options can be set to public, where anyone can see, trusted parties only, where only certain individuals or systems can read the data, or only me, which is where the data is completely private. The privacy settings for each entry in my record can also be manipulated as I wish. The majority of individuals make their email addresses private, so email is not always visible to the public. It's a good idea to encourage your researchers to at least set their email privacy to trusted party and add multiple emails, including their institutional email. This will help you find and connect with current affiliated researchers more easily once you start working with ORCID. And to quickly point out some other key features of the ORCID record, here you will see that the individual also has input their name in Chinese characters, and they also have keywords and other IDs listed. Additionally, ORCID records can contain a biography, as you can see here. And ORCID data can be added manually by the researcher, which is indicated by the individual's name as the source of information. Or organizations that have systems that are integrated with ORCID can become the trusted source and assert information onto a researcher's record with the permission of the researcher. A crucial aspect of ORCID is that the individual has full control over their record. It's also possible for organizational systems to assert peer review information onto ORCID records. However, the researcher cannot add this information directly. So as you can see here, Publons has asserted that this individual was a reviewer for the American Chemical Society in 2014. So while ORCID was created to help with name disambiguation, it's also much more than that. ORCID is actually the linchpin for system interoperability in the research and scholarly communication ecosystem. Not only does ORCID connect individuals with their affiliations and contributions, it can also connect multiple systems with each other. To connect with the ORCID registry, institutions must configure their systems in accordance with the ORCID API, or Application Programming Interface, which is basically just the instructions for how a system needs to be configured to successfully communicate with the ORCID registry. Ideally, the individual can provide name and biographical information, Research institutions can provide education and employment information at the least, while funding organizations can add information about grant funding, and publishers can update records with works and peer review information, for example. Organizations ask individuals for permission to connect, and individuals must grant permission to organizations to allow read and write access to their ORCID ID records. By using ORCID, individuals can benefit from the ability to distinguish themselves from others and get better recognition and discoverability of their contributions through ORCID as a trustworthy record of affiliations. For example, on this article, there are multiple authors with the same last name and even the same first initial. When these names are linked to ORCID IDs, it's easier to distinguish and give credit to the individual contributors. Ultimately, researchers can save time by using ORCID and allowing research, funding, and publishing organizations to read and write information rather than having to enter their information over and over again in various forms and systems. And publishers and funders are increasingly requiring ORCID IDs, so that provides an additional motivation for using ORCID. By using ORCID in institutional systems and encouraging researchers to use ORCID, institutions can mitigate confusion caused by name ambiguity, ensure trustworthy and accurate affiliations, assess impact both at the individual and institutional level, and ultimately save time and reduce administrative burden for both individual researchers and institutions. So this sounds great, right? So how do we get started? So there are three main things to think about as you begin to plan ORCID activities at your institution: stakeholder support, technical integration, and outreach and education. Generally, the stakeholder support should happen first, but technical integration and outreach can be overlapping, cyclical, and iterative activities that expand and improve over time. In most cases, libraries are leading the ORCID effort at research institutions, but ORCID has benefits for more than just the library. In order to really get the most value from ORCID, support will likely be needed from stakeholders across your organization. So in many cases, the first step of adopting ORCID will be to build a business case and get buy-in from other internal stakeholders if you haven't already. This image is a flyer that describes the benefits of ORCID for research institutions, and it can be downloaded and printed in multiple languages on the members.orcid.org site. Common stakeholder groups at research institutions include the library, graduate school, research office, provost, central IT, grants office, human resources, and various academic units. Of course, this varies across contexts, but in general, these are the groups that can benefit from ORCID at a research institution. For planning purposes, a best practice is to strategize with a cross-institutional group comprised of representatives from multiple stakeholder units to really get the most value from ORCID across the board. Building this kind of group often requires support at the upper administrative level, but support from staff and faculty champions is also beneficial. Communication about ORCID is key in making sure that all stakeholders and decision makers understand the value that ORCID can bring to your organization and affiliated researchers. A recent example of this kind of group comes from Florida State University, where the libraries have reached out to multiple internal stakeholders and created a document outlining expectations for a cross-campus ORCID committee, comprised of representatives from the Office of Faculty Development and Advancement, the Office of Research, university libraries, Office of Institutional Research, the National Magnet Lab, the Graduate School, and the College of Medicine. So this is just one example. As you begin planning with a group like this, think about what each group would want to do with ORCID and what the institution would like to do as a whole. For example, would you want to just read information from ORCID records? Do you want to write information to ORCID records? And what kind of ORCID data would you be most interested in? There are many possibilities for what you can achieve, depending on your goals and what kind of systems you're using. Some common systems for ORCID integration include institutional ID or profile systems, current research information systems, or CRIS, grant management systems, and human resources systems like PeopleSoft, for example. For libraries especially, institutional repository systems are common integration points. And in fact, there's currently a global ORCID repositories task force working to make specific recommendations for more efficient integration with repositories. Also, publishing platforms, peer review software, ETD submission systems, and data management platforms have common workflows that could benefit from ORCID integration. So when it comes to your ORCID technical integration planning, it's a good idea to inventory what systems you are already using at your institution and how those systems could work with ORCID. Information about integrations and workflows specific to each type of system can be found on the ORCID website. This graphic that we have here represents how you could integrate 5 different systems directly with the ORCID registry. On the other hand, it's also beneficial to think about how information could flow between systems to create an elegant and efficient infrastructure to suit various needs across the institution. This graphic is from the Czech Technical University in Prague, and it shows the possibility of connecting one system directly with the ORCID registry, in this case, the Central ID Management System, and then connecting other systems with each other to leverage ORCID with information flowing between systems. This is just an example, but it's something to think about as you assess your institutional systems and plan for the future. Keep in mind that your membership includes 5 API credentials for 5 integration points with ORCID. If you are already using or planning to use a third-party vendor system for any of your needs, you may already have built-in support for ORCID. Common vendor systems in the US that already support authenticated ORCID functionality are primarily in the current research information system realm, such as Pure, Digital Measures, Faculty 180, Clarivate Analytics, Converis, and Symplectic Elements by Digital Science. These are just a few examples. I'm working on creating a matrix of both vendor and open source systems to show whether or not they currently support ORCID, so you can have a better idea of different systems at a glance. So stay tuned for that. In many of these cases with vendor systems, enabling ORCID functionality can be super easy. You will just need to request ORCID production API credentials by filling out an online form, provide those credentials to your vendor, and have them plug them in to your instance and turn on the functionality. This graphic shows the integration process for Digital Measures, which recently released an ORCID integration this past summer in June. More information about ORCID-enabled third-party systems can be found online. And if you're not sure if a system supports ORCID or not, just please contact me and I can help you investigate. If a vendor system that you are using does not already support authenticated ORCID functionality, such as bpress, for example, the best path of action is to contact your vendor and request that they build in ORCID functionality. The more requests they get from their customers, the more likely they will add ORCID functionality to their products. Once you have activated a vendor integration, especially for CRIS systems, you'll need to educate your faculty about how to use ORCID with these systems, which is also part of the outreach and education component of ORCID adoption. For example, the Virginia Tech LibGuide, shown here, provides a video about how ORCID works with elements. And they also provide information about how to populate works in an ORCID record. So you'll want to think about providing some sort of training for your users. For local custom system integrations, you'll need at least one developer to work on system configuration with the ORCID API. The very first step for any custom integration is to apply for sandbox credentials, which is done by filling out a form on the ORCID website. The ORCID API is based on OAuth 2.0, a process that uses HTTP calls to request permission from researchers to connect with their ORCID ID records. Technical integration is an iterative process, but the basics include configuring your system for OAuth and maintaining a secure database where ORCID information can be stored. The ORCID website has documentation about how technical integration works, including tutorials for how to achieve specific goals. Best practices for technical integration include following the 5 iterative steps laid out here. At first, you'll want to focus on configuring your system to use OAuth 2.0 to ask researchers for permission to connect with their records. Then you'll want to incorporate the display of ORCID IDs in the user interface of your system using the green ID icon. From there, you can focus on using the API to collect or read information from authenticated ORCID records, as well as connect or write information to ORCID records. Ultimately, you can configure your systems to automatically synchronize when updates are made to ORCID data on affiliated researchers' records. To get the most value from ORCID, institutions need to use the ORCID API to connect systems with researchers' authenticated ORCID IDs. This means having the user sign in to their ORCID record and authenticating their ID to ensure a secure and accurate connection between institutional systems and the ORCID registry. If a researcher is asked to manually type or cut and paste their ID into a form, there's no way to ensure that this is a secure connection. The number might be incorrect or have a typo, and manual entry of ORCID IDs does not allow for transfer of ORCID data from one system to another. Manual entry only captures the ID number, which may not even be accurate. So it is recommended that systems avoid using a manual entry field to get that ORCID ID info. So instead of doing the manual entry, in order to connect with researchers' ORCID ID records, you will need them to authenticate and grant permission for your institution to connect. To do this, you will present the user with what we call the Create or Connect interface, something like what you see here. This is best presented to the user at a point in your system workflow where they're already logging into your system, or you can send out an email, for example, with the same interface. If the user does not yet have an ORCID ID, they will click the Create button. This would take them to the ORCID registration page where they would fill out a quick form and register for their ORCID ID. If the researcher already has an ORCID ID, they would click the Connect prompt and log into their ORCID record to verify and authenticate their ID. Users can either log in with their ORCID credentials, or for their convenience, many US research institutions are already set up for users to sign into ORCID with their institutional credentials, so they don't have to remember an additional password for their ORCID record. Please note that this is a convenience for the researcher and does not automatically link their record with any of your systems. So once the researcher registers or signs in, they would see a pop-up screen that looks like this, asking for permission for your organization to connect with their record. This screen can be customized for whatever your communication needs might be. So in this example, this request is asking for permission to read the individual's limited access information, which is the information set to trusted parties only visibility, as well as to add and update research activities. While it's possible to only ask for read permissions, if you decide later on that you want to write information to ORCID ID records, the researcher would have to go through this authorization process again to grant those additional permissions. So to make things as easy as possible for the researcher, it's recommended that you go ahead and ask for all the permissions that you want up front. That way they only have to go through this authorization process once for each system integration. Typically, once an individual authorizes this connection, the permissions remain in place for 20 years. In this example, the user is presented with an option to only allow one-time permissions by unchecking the box. This way, the individual acknowledges that once granted, access to their ORCID record remains in place. Ideally, the user will click the Authorize button to grant permission for your system to connect. Once the researcher clicks Authorize, your system will receive back a handful of data that needs to be stored securely, including the individual's name, their ORCID ID, and an access token that will be used by your system in the future to read or write data within their ORCID record. As I mentioned, permissions remain in place for 20 years unless revoked by the researcher or by your institution. Once you have these permissions, you can then use the API to benefit from and contribute to the greater ORCID ecosystem. A good example of a user interface for the Create or Connect functionality is from the University of Arizona. As you can see, their Create or Connect ORCID ID button is front and center and includes the ID icon. They provide information about ORCID with a link to more info, as well as contact information. And they include information about all of the internal stakeholders on campus, as well as the ORCID member organization logo, which is helpful in terms of outreach and education. And they're displaying what are called Collect and Connect badges, which indicate that their integration has been reviewed by ORCID and meets the best practices for ORCID integration. The final piece of the ORCID puzzle is outreach and education to get researchers to create and use their ORCID ID. The more people and systems that are connected to ORCID, the better the entire ecosystem will work for everyone. This piece is just as important as the technical integration, since the two play into each other. You can start doing outreach before you have a technical integration. It's never too soon to begin educating researchers about ORCID. To start, make sure to use the ORCID logo where applicable and the member institution logo on your website. As you start thinking about outreach at your institution, consider whether you want to start with a target pilot population, such as new faculty, new students, or individuals from a specific academic unit. Think about who will be leading the outreach efforts. This could be individuals from the cross-campus group that we talked about earlier, or there could be a team of subject specialist librarians, for example, leading the outreach efforts. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has embarked on outreach efforts led by a team of subject specialist librarians and using swag like pins and buttons to promote ORCID to researchers. Regardless of your outreach approach, it's important to determine points of contact and who will be responsible for answering researchers' questions about ORCID. The ORCID website provides a range of resources, tutorials, and videos aimed at helping end users, so those can be leveraged as well. And in terms of swag, ORCID has an online store where you can purchase swag, or you can create your own. Just make sure to follow ORCID's logo usage guidelines. I'm also working on creating some US community-specific swag, so if you'd like a small assortment of stickers, just let me know. You can also print some promotional materials that ORCID makes available on their website. So if you go to the ORCID Outreach Resources page, you'll find a number of items on the left side of the screen, such as banners, bookmarks, and flyers that can be printed out, and presentation slides that can be used, and even sample promotional text. Included on this page is also a 3-phase communication toolkit that provides guidance for 3 phases of ORCID outreach. The first phase of outreach is building awareness and letting people know what ORCID is and how it can benefit them. Many institutions have a website or a LibGuide that provides information about ORCID. Depending on what might work best in your context, you could use a newsletter, flyers, bookmarks, educational presentations, and ORCID swag to start raising awareness about ORCID. This image is a flyer explaining the benefits of ORCID for researchers that can be downloaded or printed in multiple languages from the ORCID website. ORCID provides this bookmark design, for example, that can be easily printed out and distributed for a quick win. For example, American University printed out the bookmarks and just put them into books that faculty had on reserve and would be picking up. You can also just put bookmarks out at the reference desk or the circulation desk. And there are a lot of quick, easy, subtle ways to start planting the seed and get ORCID on researchers' radars. Austin College has an example of a good LibGuide where they're using the ID icon. They're providing information about how to register for an ORCID ID, as well as bullet point benefits for researchers, additional information and how-tos for taking advantage of ORCID, and contact information for who to ask if a researcher has questions. There are many good examples of institutional LibGuides and other online resources about ORCID, and many other institutions and representatives in the community have started to share links to these resources in the members-only discussion forum. The second phase of ORCID outreach is promoting action, getting researchers to actually register and populate their ORCID records. And if you have an integration, this is the time to let researchers know that your system will be asking them for permission to connect. Because ORCID deals in identity and personal information, it's crucial to let researchers know why you want them to use ORCID, what you are going to do with their ORCID data, and how it will benefit them. This kind of activity is great for new student and new faculty orientation, or for special events like Open Access Week and part of ongoing scholarly communications training. This slide here just shows some sample text that can be used to explain to researchers what ORCID is, why your organization is asking them to connect, and how it will benefit them. This information can be found on the link listed at the bottom of the slide. So an example of promoting action, Baylor University did a promotional push for action by going around to faculty areas at lunchtime and offering a free cookie to each person who registered for an ORCID ID. And they got about 250 people to register within the week. And this is an actual image of the cookies that they handed out. In addition to that, I would also like to point out that ORCID now has a 3D printed cookie cutter template that can be used, and you can find that online at the link listed here. And then phase 3 of outreach is actually an ongoing phase of maintaining awareness of ORCID and reminding people to keep using their ORCID IDs. As I mentioned, publishers and funders are increasingly using and requiring ORCID IDs, so keeping researchers aware of updates and tips can save them time and effort in the long run. This is a recent tweet from a researcher who was notified via ORCID of their publication going live before even the journal could notify them. So this is just an example of the kind of benefits that researchers can get by continuing to use ORCID. And a cool idea to remind researchers to use ORCID from the University of Oklahoma is a research profile impact challenge, similar to a fitness challenge, but with different scholarly communication activities to raise the profile of an individual's research. OU launched this program with the start of the school year, and ORCID was the very first topic included in the challenge activities. There could be dozens of creative ways to reach out to researchers about ORCID, and I'm curious to hear from others about ideas that you have or things that you have done. Would anyone like to share any outreach activities that you've done, or does anyone have any questions at this point? And you should be able to unmute yourself or type into the chat box. Are there any comments or questions at all in general? I'll give everyone a moment to think. Oh, Mark, are you raising a hand?
Yes. So
Hi.
my question is, we have 5 keys that we can spread across for 5 integrations on campus. As the library, we're the registered contact. How do we make sure that if someone around campus registers for a key, but we're not notified, that we get notified so that we can kind of manage our 5 better? Because I don't necessarily want suddenly, 6 areas around campus asking for the keys and not knowing that they're asking for the keys.
That's a great question. Thank you, Mark. Eric, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I can jump on that one. So one thing we'll particularly be getting better about is if the university or yourself or the library or yourself are the main contacts for the institution, and we have requests for credentials, then we would at the very least copy you as we're exchanging and giving the credentials to the whichever department or area of campus have made that request. And if it seems like an outlier, or if you're getting close to your cap, so you already have 2 or 3, then we would contact you beforehand to make sure that you are aware, and if there are issues or realignments needed, then you would be on top of that. And we've had that starting to happen. It was, for a long time that wasn't necessary because universities only had maybe 1 or 2 projects, but now we're finding that universities are getting to their 5 caps, and they're finding ways to split into multiple memberships or expand that limit. So we'll definitely let you know if you have new integrations or updates going forward.
Great, thank you, Eric. And this also might be a good kind of opportunity for the cross-campus ORCID group. So thinking about putting together some sort of group with different stakeholders from different units that might be interested in ORCID, and kind of keeping communication going at the institutional level could potentially also help keep track of the different credentials and mitigate any confusion there. Any other questions or comments? Well, if anybody does think of anything that they would like to ask or share, definitely, yes, we will have a recording that will be sent out to everyone who registered for this webinar, as well as through our member communication channels. So a recording will be made available. And I'll also be sharing a copy of these slides so that you can have access to all of the links and the details within. For sure. Okay, great. Well, I hope this has been helpful in answering any of your questions. And if more questions do come up, definitely feel free to send an email to orcidus@lyrasis.org, as you see here on this slide. And also, take a look at the website. And I'll just look forward to hearing from you all later on. And I guess with that, we can conclude, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon. All right, thank you.